Arundel Castle is the ancestral seat of the Dukes of Norfolk, the only surviving dukedom of medieval creation. No other English family has had such a dramatic history as the Howards, at one moment the greatest servants of the crown, at the next imprisoned in the Tower or mounting the scaffold. The present Duke is the 17th in line of succession, but he never expected to find himself Lord of Arundel, with the Norfolk flag flying in his honour. Your Grace, when did you first come to Arundel Castle?
Well, I first came here actually straight after Dunkirk, when I was adjutant of the 1st Grenadiers and 7th Guards Brigade, about July 1940, came here. There was the 1st Coldstream with us too. And brigadier quarters was in the castle, and my cousin Bernard asked the commanding officer, Colonel John Prescott, and the adjutant, who was me, down to have supper with him one night in the smoking room.
Neither of you realising at that time that you once be the incumbent?
Absolutely. In no sense did I think that it was going to work out like this.
Didn't they have to go right back to about the 13th Duke to find a common ancestor?
Our common ancestor was the 13th Duke. And I'm actually more closely related to my cousin through his mother than through his father.
What about this, the keep itself, which is one of the, well, the oldest part of the castle?
Yes, this is the oldest. And as you can see, we're on a man-made mound, which possibly was here in Saxon times. There seems to be some dispute about this. And anyhow, after William the Conqueror had captured England, as we all know, in 1066, he gave this to Roger de Montgomery. And Roger de Montgomery he left behind in Normandy so as to guard Normandy for him. And once he'd captured England, he got Roger over here, and Sussex had been divided into 3 rapes: the rape of Chichester, the rape of Arundel, and Roger de Montgomery was given this castle and the rape of Arundel. And as you see, this keep, which of course had huts and everything inside it, is made on the man-made mound, and it dominates the Arun Valley, the River Arun running up there. And it's the most elementary bit of soldiering to see that if you held this part, you obviously would control the Arun Valley.
In the 12th century, the castle and lands were bestowed on the d'Aubigny family with the title of Earl of Arundel and the office of Chief Butler of England, which is still held by the Duke of Norfolk. The estates passed through the female line to the Fitzalans, who saw the earldom of Arundel established in its original supremacy of honour above every other similar title of dignity. They fought for the king in Wales, Scotland and France, occasionally rebelled and often lost their heads, but the Howard family they married into did all of that on a much more spectacular scale. In their rise to power, the Howards made full use of all 3 major paths to noble status which the Middle Ages in England offered: the law, warfare and marriage. Richard III created the 1st Duke of Norfolk. When Henry Tudor claimed the throne, the Duke remained loyal, ignoring the verse that was supposedly nailed to his gate the night before he joined the king: "Jack of Norfolk, be not too bold, for Dickon thy master is bought and sold." His son lost the dukedom by attainder, but regained it at the age of 70 for brilliantly leading the English to victory over the Scots at Flodden. The 3rd Duke's the most famous, or infamous, of all. Said to be on anybody's shortlist for the nastiest man in English history award, his loyalty to Henry VIII outweighed all other constraints. He brutally suppressed the Catholic Pilgrimage of Grace, married off 2 of his nieces to the king, Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard, but then took a leading part in their condemnations for adultery. He only escaped beheading himself because the king died on the day set for his execution. The present Duke is very conscious of the blood-bolted history of his ancestors. They held great offices of state, but many of them suffered attainder, including the 4th Duke, who acquired Arundel by marriage. So the marriage of the 4th Duke firmly established Arundel Castle in the hands of the Norfolks?
Quite correct. There is a picture of the 4th Duke, and there is Mary Fitzalan, whom he married, and that's how the Howards came to the Fitzallen house at Arundel. And he married in 1556. They had one son, and Mary died having the son, who was Philip, who we're very proud of because he was imprisoned in the Tower, like so many of us, and he died in the Tower for the old faith, and is one of the 40 martyrs of the Catholic canonized saints.
But Thomas Howard himself, the fourth Duke, had two more very short marriages, didn't he?
He married twice more, and that's how we've got other families in, like the de Waldens. And then he is famous in the history of the nation for trying to marry Mary Queen of Scots. And he never actually met Mary Queen of Scots, but the Rodolphe plot was hatched around this fact, and for this he was taken to the Tower and beheaded. He was, of course, a Protestant. He was not a Catholic at all, as many people forget. And Mary Queen of Scots had great devotion to Philip's wife, and her rosary, which she took to the scaffold, which is here, has been handed down. It's one of our most treasured possessions. And this is the rosary that she took with her to the scaffold.
I've never held a rosary before. I must give it back to you.
There we are. There we are.
Amazing experience.
There we are.
Beautiful piece.
Yes.
What about some of the other pictures in the room? I know you have the...
We have many famous pictures in this room, and there are those of the Collector Earl with his wife Alethea Talbot, whom he married. He was a very poor man because Philip, his father, had been died in the Tower, and the family had been attainted. But fortunately, he married Alethea Talbot, the daughter of the Earl of Shrewsbury, who became the heiress of the Earl of Shrewsbury, and that's how he managed to have enough money to travel on the continent and make the great collections. He collected over 600 pictures, many of which are now in the Royal Collection, the Holbein drawings and things like that, because the family lost them later on. And he was a patron of Van Dyck, who he brought over here. We've got several Van Dycks in this room. There's one there of Charles I, and the Queen has another copy. There's another one there of the Collector Earl and his grandson, who became the 5th Duke. And then going back to that picture there is the Collector Earl with his wife Alethea Talbot, with his statues, which are now in the Ashmolean Museum at Oxford, and then one of her with the pictures.
So how much of the collection that he made is still at Arundel?
Some, but not very much. It got sold subsequently. Perhaps one of his greatest claims to fame is that he and Charles I were really the beginnings of the European collectors of fine arts. And he had Inigo Jones as his interpreter, and Inigo Jones was very friendly with Palladio, and when Inigo Jones built the Queen's House at Greenwich, that was the beginning of Palladian architecture and the end of the Gothic architecture and the beginning of the Renaissance in England, really.
And after him, the fortunes of the Howard family fell again and rose with the 11th
Indeed.
Duke.
Well, yes, that is quite true. And we have also a picture of the 11th Duke up there.
Now, what's your nickname for him?
Well, he's called the Drunken Duke because he was a great friend of the Prince Regent, and they used to drink a lot together. They frequently went to the Royal Pavilion at Brighton, and there are many stories told of him. He was a great Whig, a great friend of Fox, and was always toasting the liberty of the people. He annoyed the government of the time, and he gave up the Catholic faith and became really a sort of agnostic. The chapel, which is now the dining room, he turned into a dining room. And he's famous. He had 2 wives. His first wife died without any children. His second wife went mad, And so he had many descendants, but many children, but no descendants. And there are many stories.
You mean no legitimate ones?
Many illegitimate ones, exactly. And there are stories of him driving into Greystock Castle with his coachman, and the coachman surrounded by children, and the drunken Duke said, "Who are all these children?" And the coachman said, "Some are mine, your Duke, your Grace, and some are yours, your Grace." And it was he who had this great party in the castle to celebrate Magna Carta, the 600th anniversary.
So he built a lot of the castle, he restored a lot of the castle, and a lot of by this time, and certainly by now, a lot of other titles had come into the family. Can we look at the coat of arms?
Yes,
over
indeed,
the fireplace?
indeed. The coat of arms up there, you see there, the first quartering up there is the Howard quartering, with the crosslets and the bend, and on the bend you see the augmentation that was given to us for the Battle of Flodden in 1513, where one of the very few families who has got an honourable augmentation given on its arms. This was given by Henry VIII. The Duke of Marlborough has one for Blenheim, Duke of Wellington's got one for Waterloo. Then the next three Lions of England, because we're descended from the youngest son of Edward I, Thomas of Brotherton, and you see that's got a label on it to show that we're a junior branch. And then there's the Fitzalan Lion rampant, and then the next are the checkers for the Earl of Surrey, the House of Warren.
But you are the Earl Marshal of England. Is there anything there?
You can see the Earl Marshal's battens behind the coat of arms. Two battens, and when it's a deputy Earl Marshal, they only have one batten. And then you see the lion and the Fitzalan horse with his little bit of sprig of oak in his mouth as the two supporters.
Can we pick up the history now in the Baron's Hall?
I think that would be perhaps our next place.
Now, the Baron's Hall is interesting, not least for its pictures.
Indeed, we have many family portraits here, and there's one of our two cardinals, Cardinal Philip Howard, who was a great friend of Charles II and was the only English witness when he married Catherine of Braganza. And he became Catherine of Braganza's Grand Almoner and looked after her chapel in St. James's Palace.
What was a Grand Almoner?
Well, it meant he was her chaplain, the chaplain to the Queen. He was allowed to be there as a Catholic, and he played a great part in trying to heal this awful breach between the Church of England and Rome at the time.
Yes.
He had been made the Vicar Apostolic of the Catholics in England, and he also played a great part in the marriage of Mary of Modena.
That's this lady here.
Which we have a picture up there, to James II, the brother of Charles II. And he was really responsible for that marriage coming off.
He didn't choose a very strong Catholic, well, a strong Catholic, not a very strong man in James II.
Well, James II was an impossible man, wasn't he? And was intolerant, and really ended up in the hopeless position of the glorious revolution of 1688.
But the Cardinal himself was out of the country.
Yes, the Cardinal had to leave the country in the end because the opposition didn't want to have him there. And so at the time of the Popish plot, the Titus Oates plot, which was largely manufactured, in fact almost entirely manufactured, he was out of the country, and if he hadn't been, I think there would have been considerable trouble for him, because they accused him of planning to become Archbishop of Canterbury, the Catholic Archbishop of Canterbury. And in fact, they satisfied themselves by arresting his uncle, Viscount Stafford, who was beheaded for the Popish plot.
Now, this is an interesting picture because this is the son of the first Duke, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. It's by the American Boston artist Mather Brown, and it shows Henry VII interviewing the second Duke, who'd been fighting at Bosworth and was wounded and put in the Tower, and of course attainted, so lost his dukedom. And Henry VII said he would release him once he said that he would support who's ever on the throne as elected by Parliament. And there he is, being interviewed by Henry VII, and he was then released and made Earl of Surrey.
And he did swear allegiance to the throne?
And he swore his allegiance to the throne.
Yes.
But he didn't have his dukedom restored, and he went on as Earl of Surrey for the rest of Henry VII's reign.
Really? Now this is an interesting one, because this is the great Collector Earl who we met in the drawing room.
Indeed, the great Collector Earl with his wife Alethea, and they've got he's got his art garter and his Pierre's robes on, and it's called the Madagascar portrait because he's painted a Madagascar, which he was thinking of going out and colonizing, and he didn't in the end, because there were amusing reports saying it was too full of fleas.
Now that's a Van Dyck.
It's a Van Dyck.
Is that significant?
And it's really one of our best Van Dycks. And the Collector Earl brought Van Dyck to England, and we have several, as you've already seen.
And what a perfect setting the hall is for that painting.
Yes, it is. It's really the best painting we have in the hall. Yes.
Oh, I see. This was the old chapel that you were telling me about earlier.
This was the chapel, and the drunken Duke turned it into his dining room, the 11th Duke.
It's a marvellous room, isn't it?
Well, it is. Of course, it's an extremely high vaulted room. As you can see, it was a chapel, really.
Can we sit down?
Yes, come on.
Oh, lovely. Now, who would he have entertained here, the 11th Duke?
Well, he was a great friend of the Prince Regent, who, of course, used to come down to the pavilion of Brighton, and they were, you know, great friends, and the whole of the Creevy and Foxite party must have come here, and their stories, you know, of the Prince Regent planning getting the 11th Duke drunk. And there was one famous occasion when he got him in such a state that he put him back in his coach, and the coach drove round Brighton and never drove here. And this was the joke that the Prince Regent had, that he woke up and he was still at Brighton and hadn't come back to Arundel at all.
Now, the clock's just struck 5. That's not quite time for the drunken Duke's dinner, is it?
No, he is also famous for having changed the major meal of the day from 3 o'clock, which is what happened in the 18th century, to 6:30 in the evening.
Oh, I see. Yes, that's interesting. He was the first one to do that.
Well, that ended his reputation.
Can we look at some of the pieces on the table? This wine stand here. Now, that's got the horses of the FitzAlan.
That's right, the FitzAlan horse. You see, on the family supporters, the FitzAlan horse with a bit of oak in its mouth is the right-hand supporter, and then the Howard Lion is the supporter on the other side.
And so you've got an identical one the other end.
That's
with the
right.
lion. And the crest, the family crest is
well,
on
these are the wings with the
plate.
Howard arms on them.
Yes. Lovely. It all looks so beautiful. What would this room be used for today?
Well, I mean, we never have our meals here at all. We have them up in a little flat upstairs. But this occasionally is used. I mean, for instance, when President Arab Moi of Kenya came on a state visit to England about 3 years ago, we were asked to entertain him down here. And you see, I come out of the King's African Rifles in Kenya as a brigadier about 15 years ago. And he came here, and we had an enormous lunch, in which this room looked very fine.
Well, we're obviously not going to get any food if we sit here, are we?
There's no use sitting here, I can assure you. No food is served at all.
Shall we move on?
I think it'd be very wise.
Where should we go? Can we go to the library?
Let's go and see the library.
Lovely.
Let's go and see the library. This is our library, which is really the most lovely room in the house. It was built by the 11th Duke about 1790, and in Honduras mahogany, unfortunately not rebuilt when the rest of the castle was by the 15th Duke. It was all left.
Lovely, isn't it?
We have some wonderful cabinets here. This one is a French one by Jean Lamé, who came from Blois and went to the Louvre and made things for Louis XIV. And it's really very lovely inside. There's a story that this was going to be some wedding present, but I'm not certain what the full story is. It's never really been established.
And what would that have been used for?
Well, I suppose all these things were used for putting little trinkets and things like that in. There were no papers in those days. I don't know what it was really used for. Just a sort of place for... It's full of little secret drawers and so on.
Pretty. How pretty.
Yes. And then here we have one of our few little bits of the Collector's marbles. That's a Diossa bust of Charles I, because most of the marbles, of course, have all been given by the 6th Duke to the Ashmolean Museum. And, of course, the books in this library are from the 9th Duke's collection after the fire at Worksop, and the 11th Duke added to it. But the great Pirkheimer library that the Collector purchased was given by the 6th Duke to the Royal Society and the College of Arms.
You've still got a lot of books left.
Well, these were subsequently bought, of course.
This is a map of here,
yes,
of Sussex.
This is a map of Sussex, and this is the first edition of maps, and almost all maps were found in the Saxton Book of Maps.
Can we look at some of the other books, because we've got some lovely ones here. What's this one?
This is, I think, a French book of views of England, and this is one of London, and you can see the tower where we've had rather sad time, and it rather makes us shudder in the same way that I think some people shudder when they hear Wormwood Scrubs said. Well, we always shudder when the towers said, because so many of our family have ended their lives there.
That's lovely, that map of London. This is a book for the ladies, I think you'd call this.
Well, it's
apothecaries.
It's apothecaries book, really. It's a book of the flowers and shrubs. Very beautifully illustrated, isn't it?
What's that, the gooseberry?
Yes.
I wonder what that would have been used for.
Well, it's some very lovely illustrations in it.
And herbal medicine is all
yes, that sort of thing.
As well.
Yeah, yeah.
What about this lovely little
Well, and we've got, of course, quite a lot of books that we keep right down in the archives. And this is an early book of devotions to the saints. And there's rather an interesting little thing here of St. Lawrence. And I was at school at Ampleforth, and you can see a rather lovely picture of St. Lawrence, who's one of the patrons of Ampleforth in Yorkshire.
Isn't that beautifully illustrated? How old is that?
I think it's a sort of 14th century book, this.
Really? That's pretty good. Isn't that lovely?
And the collection...
And people don't normally see that, of course.
No, we have to keep those sort of books really safely away.
Yes.
This collection, really, it's a sort of gentleman's library. And there's a lot of books on heraldry, of course, inevitably, because of the Earl Marshal thing. And I know this one is of great interest to me because it's my ancestor, whom I'm named after. It's a book of all the Knights of the Garter. And my ancestor, Sir Miles Stapleton, and my mother's family, was one of the founder knights. He was a friend of the Black Prince and used to joust with him. And it's rather amusing to think I've still got the same name. It's been handed down through my mother's family, of course.
So you were named after him, 1364?
Yes, indeed. Well, I mean, the name's gone through, the mile's gone through the Stapleton family.
All your brothers and sisters have an M.
Yes, they do. I mean, that just happened because my mother called me Miles and Michael, and they went on, Marigold, Martin, Miriam, Miranda, Mirabelle and Mark. Here is another cabinet, and this is made in Augsburg. It was for the Emperor Charles V, and he was going to give it some Spanish family, which is shown because the arms at the bottom here are Spanish. And again, it's full of very little secret drawers for filing trinkets in. It's very lovely.
Very pretty.
This
room has a very it's a long room, but it has a feeling of family, of atmosphere.
Well, it does divide up very nicely, doesn't it? And you know, one can get into little sort of cubby holes and read books without being disturbed by the other person.
Would it have been used regularly?
Well, it was, of course, you know, when people lived here permanently.
The library is one of the best memorials to the 11th Duke, who began the major rebuilding of the castle, which wasn't really finished until the end of the 19th century. Since the present Duke's accession in 1975, there have been further extensive repairs. Old and new seem to merge quite happily at Arundel. The Duke also owns large properties in Yorkshire, which have been acquired over the centuries. The family's original estates were in Norfolk, but they lost these through an earlier royal confiscation. So now Arundel has become the major family seat. And it's here that the heads of the family are now buried. Which was the last Duke to be buried here?
Well, my cousin, dear Duke Bernard, who died in 1975, and Mrs. Christopher Ironside did this memorial to him, which has got great points, and as you see, it's rather unique, having both brass and polished steel.
Most unusual, isn't it?
Yes.
In rather an ancient chapel.
Well, this was built by the 4th Earl of Arundel in 1380, and the roof it had then was contemporary of the great roof of the Westminster Hall by Hugh Herland. It's quite conceivable this roof was also owned by Hugh Herland. But the whole chapel was destroyed in the Civil War in 1646, when they shelled the keep from here, and really lay as a ruin until the early 19th century, when the 13th Duke began restoring it. And then a great restoration was done by Bernard's father, the 15th Duke.
Did that include the window?
That included the window, and you can see he put in it, in one of the panels, a picture of the 4th Earl of Arundel with a little model, as he thought it then was, of the Fitzallen Chapel.
So that's quite a modern window, in fact.
Well, it is. It's about 1870.
Some of the tombs, though, were preserved. This one is huge and ancient.
Yes, this is remarkable because the two effigies were previously up there and were therefore not touched. And it was only last year that they were cleaned by John Green and Michael Bailey. And of course these incredible colours have come to light, which haven't been made up by any falsification. And we're very, very proud of this, and so is everybody else who comes to see it, because it's almost unique to have so much medieval colour still left.
Do you think the Fitzallen Howards will continue to be buried here?
Well, I suppose so. It's become the family burial ground now, down in the vaults down here.
Religion has played a large part in the private and the public life of the Howards. Do you still use the chapel?
Yes, indeed. We have Mass here occasionally, and now in these happy ecumenical days, they have a service in St. Nicholas's Church, of course, every Sunday. But last year, in the celebrations of the quincentenary of the dukedom, we had a service with the Bishop of Chichester, the Anglican Bishop of Chichester, and the Catholic Bishop of Arundel and Brighton. And we all started off in the Anglican Church, and then came through into Fitzallen Chapel and prayed together.
It was in the last century that the imposing Catholic Cathedral of Arundel was built by the 15th Duke, and it holds the remains of the Howard saint, St. Philip Howard, who died for his faith in the Tower of London. He'd neglected the advice of his father, the 4th Duke, when he'd been imprisoned in the Tower. Beware of the court, except it be to do your prince service, and that as near as you can in the lowest degree, for that place hath no certainty. The Howards never seem to have done anything by half measures. The drunken Duke went to the other extreme. He said, "I cannot be a good Catholic, I cannot go to heaven, and if a man is to go to the devil, he may as well go thither from the House of Lords as from any other place on earth." But for all his excesses, he's remembered gratefully for his rebuilding of the castle. The architectural style he chose, a hybrid of Perpendicular Gothic and Norman, was associated in his eyes with ancient liberty, and he even dedicated the foundation stone in 1806 to liberty asserted by the barons in the reign of John. He arranged a lavish celebration here of the 600th anniversary of Magna Carta in 1815. which by chance coincided with the Duchess of Richmond's ball before Waterloo. It's as if the Dukes of Norfolk have ridden a roller coaster through English history, and as we approached the end of our tour, I realised that the story of the Dukes of Norfolk is both a dramatic and a tragic one. It's a huge legacy that your family have left you, really.
And, you know, this is quite a historic place, and I'm very proud that it's gone on, and very proud that it's part of the heritage of England.
What is your role in keeping this going? Do you ever feel that it's actually rather a burden?
No. I mean, you know, my father and I and my cousin Duke Bernard had always discussed what we should do with it, and it was decided that we would give it to the National Trust, but in fact we made an independent charitable trust, and with trustees, of which I am the chairman. There are two of the family, my brother Lord Michael's the other member of the family, and then we have the Victorian Albert Museum and the West Sussex Council and the Arundel District Council, Littlehampton and Arundel, and the British Library, and one or two others.
And how important do you think it is that these places are kept?
Oh, I think immensely important. And we have a unique heritage in England, not having been ravaged by civil wars, you know, since 1660, and invaded. And really, our manor houses, our castles are terrific. The only destruction that was done was at the Reformation, and that, unfortunately, was done in a terrible way, and we regret it all now very much, I think. But the civilian houses are in great state.
And you're the Earl Marshal of England, you're a Knight of the Garter, and you're the Premier Peer. How important is all of that?
Well, I mean, one's very proud to have had these things come to one, but I'm much more satisfied to have served in the army 30 years and to have achieved things there than all these inheritances, which I respect very much. But I think that one's really got to be one's own self and try and do some good in the world.
And of course it all started here with the keep.
Yes, indeed. I mean, one would have thought the keep might well have fallen down, but it hasn't. It's sort of stood since it was put up by Roger de Montgomery in about 1087.
And the standard showing that you're in residence?
Yes, that is the sort of custom here.
A custom that goes back 500 years to the creation of the dukedom, the oldest in the country. The office that goes with it, Earl Marshal of England, is the only one of the medieval great offices of state which still properly functions and has not been reduced to an empty honour. Service to strong monarchs was the Norfolk way. Henry VII forgave the family's support for Richard III. In the words of the young Earl of Surrey, "Sir, he was my crowned king. Let the authority of Parliament place the crown on that stake, and I will fight for it. So would I have fought for you, had the same authority placed the crown on your head." The strong Tudors were succeeded by the troubled Stuart reigns. The Civil War broke over Arundel Castle and very nearly destroyed it. The equation of Catholicism with treason imperilled not just the Howards, but finally the king himself. When James II tried to restore the old faith, he was dethroned. Cardinal Howard was fortunately safely abroad during the Titus Oates plot, or he could well have lost his head. The fourth Duke did lose his for plotting to marry Mary, Queen of Scots, and his indiscretion led to attainder and loss of much of the Howard estates. But his grandson, the Collector Earl, did more than anyone to restore the prospects of the family. Although his extravagance in collecting led him to the very verge of bankruptcy, with debts of over £100,000, his marriage to Alethea Talbot brought with it vast estates, including much of what's since become the industrial city of Sheffield, the backbone of the family fortune ever since. The drunken Duke was once accused of being too much engrossed by the phantom of the exclusive greatness of the Howards, whose dark side was treason, imprisonment, martyrdom and execution. It's called their aura of fatal glory.